Hey friends, tonight I'm sharing 3 terrifying true stories, all told in the first person. If you think they're made up, you're in for a shock. Every story I bring to this channel comes from people close to me or from first-hand accounts I trust. And the written versions of all 3 are linked in the description. I tell them exactly as they were told to me. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and listen close. It's going to get scary. Our daughter was 6 weeks old when we finally admitted we needed help sleeping. Not a nanny, not a grandma rota, just a baby monitor with a little green light that flickered when she made noise. I told myself we were buying back a sliver of peace, something to bridge those 2 a.m. feedings and keep my wife from leaping up at every phantom squeak the house made. We didn't get the fancy kind. No camera, no app, no Wi-Fi. Just a simple receiver the size of a deck of cards and a plug-in transmitter you set on the dresser. Old school, the kid at the big box stores said, like it was a compliment. Honestly, that was why I wanted it. Old school felt safe. The first weird thing was the lullaby. It was a Tuesday, late September, the kind of Austin heat that lingers at midnight like a dare. I'd just settled on the couch after taking my shift, the receiver on the coffee table next to my phone and a sweating glass of water. The monitor made its soft ocean noise static, the white hiss that everyone says you forget after an hour. I hadn't yet. I sat there counting it, silly as that sounds, mapping the ebb and flow against the ceiling fan. Then, very softly, someone began to hum. Not my wife. I know her voice the way I know my own heartbeat, and this wasn't it. Not me. I was sitting there frozen, one hand halfway to the glass. And not our daughter. She made these snuffling newborn noises that sounded like a bird breathing. This was an adult slow hum, a melody I recognized from nowhere and everywhere at once. Brahms' lullaby, but too slow, like a music box winding down. I picked up the receiver, pressed the little volume rocker all the way up, and listened so hard my ears hurt. The hum grew fuller, like the person had leaned closer to the transmitter. The green LED glowed steady. Our baby sighed in her sleep, and the hum softened, like a hand smoothing a blanket. "Hmm?" I whispered, already standing. My wife's door cracked open across the hall from the nursery. We met eyes in the dark. "Are you hearing this?" she mouthed. We both stepped into our daughter's room, moving automatically around the creaky board near the vent, the way you learn a room by the quiet years you plan to spend in it. I reached for the lamp. The transmitter sat on the dresser where I'd left it, its red power light solid. Our daughter slept on her back in her crib, mouth open, fists like tiny commas against her chest. There was no one else. The humming stopped. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. We did the same check you are probably thinking of, the one anyone would do so they don't sound like the kind of couple who hears things and calls the news. We looked under the crib, in the closet, behind the rocking chair, We pulled back the curtains to show the blank backyard and the fence beyond, the neighbors' dark windows. We checked the back door, then the front, then the garage. Nothing was open. No footprints in the dust by the back stoop, not even a cat's. We went back to bed. We told ourselves it was interference. The box had said analog, and the more that word left my mouth, the less it felt like a comfort. Maybe we were picking up a neighbor's monitor, or a baby toy, or someone's radio. The next night, the voice spoke. It started with the same soft sizzle of static, the stutter breath that told me our daughter had rolled her head. Then a whisper, unmistakably human and too close to the microphone. Shh! I sat up, the room tilting. In the receiver, it came from everywhere at once. The ceiling, the vent, the corner where the wall met the floor, and from the little speaker grill resting in my hand. I reached for my phone without looking at it and called my wife. She picked up on the first ring, didn't even say hello. "It said shh, right?" she breathed. We met again at the nursery door like sleepwalking, phones in our hands. We didn't turn on the lamp this time. The whole nightlight threw a shallow triangle of amber across the rug. Our daughter slept. "Hello?" I whispered. "Who's there?" If you'd asked me 5 minutes before, I would have said that was a stupid thing to do, like stepping into a horror movie and offering your neck. But the voice was so ordinary that it didn't trigger that fight or flight spike. It sounded like someone's aunt leaning over a bassinet in church, smiling a smile you're meant to find comforting. "Shh," the voice repeated. Then, audibly, a finger dragged across the transmitter's mic, a soft, clothy scratch. "You'll wake her." My wife grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the shape of her nails for hours after. We didn't move. The air felt suddenly cold, though the house was the stale, late summer hot that makes the walls exhale. "How are you?" I started. The voice said my full name, not the short one my co-workers use, not the affectionate version my wife calls me when she wants me to put down my phone and come taste the sauce. It was the name on the mortgage, said with a softness I have only ever heard from people who have known me my entire life. And then, like we'd all agreed on the order of the world without discussing it, the voice said my wife's name, too. We did call the police, a non-emergency line, because even then we were trying so hard to be sensible. 2 officers came, their duty belts plicking, the one on the left wearing the kind of small-talk smile people use to show they are good at their job and very bored by your panic. They looked in the attic. They crouched in the shrubs under the nursery window with flashlights, like movie stills. They took the monitor and its little wired transmitter, turned it over the way you handle something that could either be a toaster or a bomb. The older officer flicked the channel switch on the side and nodded. "These pick up garage door openers, baby monitors next door, walkie-talkies, a ton of stuff runs the same band." "Do you hear anything now?" my wife asked. He held it up, and we all listened. Static. The AC kicked on somewhere down the hall, and the officers nodded in unison, like the house had made their point for them. When they left, my wife sat on the hallway carpet with her back against the nursery door and cried into both hands. Not loud, just a sound like someone who'd been told a joke that wasn't funny after a very long day. I slid down beside her and put my shoulder to hers. We didn't go to bed. We slept in shifts on the hallway floor, like we were guarding a door in a place with a lock that didn't work. 2 days later, the voice came back. There was something different about it this time. If the first time was a neighbor's aunt, this was a trusted friend calling from your driveway. It sounded a little busy, a little out of breath, like it was moving in a hurry, but wanted to reassure us anyway. "Wake up," it whispered. I was not sleeping. My body was a fist of tension, my mind coiled and ready to spring from a dream where I was still at my desk. But hearing it said that way made my heart hit like I'd been hauled up from underwater. "Wake up now!" I was already sitting, both feet on the floor, receiver pressed so hard against my ear that it squealed. My wife was a shadow in the doorway before I could turn my head. We didn't say anything. You don't when the air takes on that metallic taste and your nervous system decides for you. "Up," the voice said again, a little firmer. "Up, up." There was a flash, not white like lightning, orange, warm, alive. It flickered in a way that told you before your brain had the words that it was fire. I didn't think. I moved. We both did. We threw the door open like the hinges were made of paper. The nursery was a strobe, bright, dark, bright, light licking at light. Our daughter was crying, a sound that cut me into neat pieces and stacked them efficiently. The curtains were alight, the top hem where the fabric met the rod burning blue for a second before dropping into orange. I got to the crib without seeing how I did it. My wife pulled the flaming fabric down with her forearm, the way you yank off a Band-Aid. She stomped it with the bottoms of her feet, the way you do with a small spider you couldn't stand to see move. There was smoke, not movie smoke, thick, mean, like a hand over your mouth. We were out of the house with our baby, and then I was back inside, grabbing the fire extinguisher from under the kitchen sink. And then the room was full of a white cloud that smelled like a hardware store. The extinguisher's handle shook in my hands like an overexcited dog on a leash.
After, sitting on the curb with our daughter's sleep hat squished in my fist, I listened to the firefighter in the heavy jacket explain how lucky we were. "Space heater," he said, nudging our guilty little gray unit with the toe of his boot. "Bet you were testing the nursery for winter. Those things draw more than you think when your circuit's already loaded. Plugged into an extension cord, too. Dangerous." We hadn't used the heater. It wasn't plugged in. We had taken it out to think about where it would go. The extension cord? Different story. I'd been lazy and used the orange cord from the garage to bring power to the far corner for a string of star-shaped nightlights. The firefighter's flashlight beam found the melted end, where the plastic had bubbled and made a shape like a clover. "You were lucky," he said again, and his voice softened. "I'm a dad. Believe me, you were lucky." We slept at my in-laws that night. Slept like you survived turbulence. Our daughter breathed in long, steady pulls, head tilted back, the way babies are just built to trust the world. My wife and I lay on our backs staring at the ceiling fan, listening to an air conditioner that wasn't ours. At 3 in the morning, I turned my head to her and whispered, "It said to wake up." "I know," she whispered back. We left the monitor unplugged on the counter when we returned. The transmitter coiled carefully, like something you say you'll fix and never do. I still brought the receiver with me to the couch at night. Did I expect it to make noise without power? I don't know what I expected. I held it like a charm anyway. I put it on the coffee table. I aligned it with the edge the way you line up a phone you plan to forget and accidentally remember. That Sunday, close to dawn, it came back alive. There was no power light. The cord dangled like a dead vine, but the little speaker made a sound like a breath behind a door. Then, clear as the first night, someone hummed Brahms' lullaby so low it almost wasn't there. The hair on my arms prickled like it does when a storm makes the air say it's coming. I picked it up and walked to the hallway, not because I thought there was someone there, but because I did not know how to sit and listen to that in a comfortable chair. "Thank you," I whispered. I didn't believe in anything in particular at that moment, but I've said thank you to strangers who held doors for me. It seemed wrong not to do it now. A pause. Then, in a voice I realized with sudden ridiculous certainty was older than mine by decades, "Shh," it said, like smiling. We sold the house when our daughter was toddling, when she had learned to point and say, at things we couldn't see. At the ceiling vent. At the corner of the nursery where the air didn't quite move like the rest. Into the monitor's unplugged dot of a microphone. We moved across town to a place with morning shade and a backyard that wasn't so close to anyone's fence. We bought a new monitor, the kind with a camera, and an app that sent pictures of our sleeping child to our phones, which we swore we'd never do, and then did anyway because time softens promise the way water softens wood. Sometimes, late at night, the app sent a picture of the nursery when the nightlight made the air look like water at the bottom of a pool. Sometimes the picture arrived with a 3-second delay, and the app's timestamp showed me there was a gap between the world and the camera that told us about it. On one of those nights, half asleep and paying bills in a browser window I meant to close and didn't, the app sent a burst of images, one after the other, old notifications stacking on new. The very first picture had a caption the app didn't know how to write. Hush, now. Not text, not overlaid font. It was part of the picture itself, written crooked in light, like someone had traced letters into the air through the camera's infrared and hoped we would notice. I didn't make my wife. I put the phone down and went to the doorway of my daughter's room and leaned my head against the cool jamb. She snored, the soft, tiny snore of people who are still learning how to be human. I stood there until my knees hurt. We don't use a monitor anymore. Sometimes when the house is really quiet, when the fridge clicks and the AC hiccups, I swear I hear humming under the noise. It's not frightening, not even now. If anything, it makes me want to switch the receiver back on just to say thank you to the air, and mean it. Some nights, just before I fall asleep, right at that place where your mind loosens its grip and the day slips, it's like I hear 3 people humming. One part I recognize as my wife when she folds laundry. One is a little off-key and always has been. And the third is lower than both, a part that comes in just when you need it, steady as the old clock my grandmother used to keep in her hallway. Sure in a way that makes you sure too. Shh. The third one always says when the song ends,
"You'll wake her." If you ever come across an antique mirror for cheap, ask yourself why it's cheap. This story still gets under my skin because the mirror didn't lie to him. At first, it helped. The mirror wasn't haunted. That's what I told people when I finally admitted I hadn't sold it because I needed the money. It wasn't haunted, I'd say, and understand less every time how a statement could be true and not true at once. I found it on a Sunday, the kind of humid Chicago afternoon where the sidewalks shine like they have their own weather. I'd gone to buy a bookcase from a thrift store that used to be a movie theater, the kind with a marquee someone had repurposed into a menu board. I left with the bookcase, and because the man at the counter gave me a 15% discount for carrying it myself, I wandered one more aisle like loose change in a pocket, and got pulled by my peripheral vision into the mirror's orbit. It was oval, 6 feet tall, wood frame carved with vines I recognized as hand-done because they were a little sloppy in a beautiful way, like handwriting versus a font. The glass had that old shimmer that turned straight lines into water, but it wasn't cracked or fogged. There was an index card taped to the back, the Selby Hotel, 1956, room 204. Price, $80, which felt insulting in a way that made me want to rescue it. I leaned it against the wall in my studio apartment and shrugged out of my shirt to see how it made me look. Productive, for the first time all year. I could see the whole room in it. My bed, my battered drafting table, the kitchen with the stove you had to light with a match, and the window that looked over the alley. The mirror's view made the room look like a stage set of my life. People expect the first thing to be big, a hand in the glass, a face over your shoulder that isn't yours. It wasn't. The first thing was a half second. I discovered it by accident, because that's how a lot of your life goes, even when you pretend you planned it. I had a coin in my pocket, a token from the Blue Line, because I like the tactile feel of them and keep them long after I've used them. Without thinking, I tossed it from one palm to the other as I stood in front of the mirror and watched myself not shave. And the flash of metal in the mirror came before the coin left the cup of my hand. I froze. Tossed again. The mirror beat me by a heartbeat. I tossed faster, trying to trick it, and the mirror kept cheating, showing me what I was about to do just before the world caught up. I stood there longer than you'd think possible, because your brain loves a puzzle more than breakfast. I set my coffee cup on the dresser and watched the mirror show it seated before I'd felt the wood. I waved 2 fingers, then 3, then a whole palm, and the mirror anticipated each, a half second ahead, like a friend finishing your sentences. Was it a trick of my eyes? A mismatch in the rattly old floorboards? The mirror had a plastic plaque under the frame that said H. Larkin and Son, Chicago, in letters that made me think of a suit with cigarette smoke woven into the fabric. I rapped my knuckles lightly on the glass and felt it answer in my bones. I told myself it was funny, a party trick I could show a date, except I didn't have dates, and when I did, I had a habit of apologizing for the mess and inventing excuses for why a studio apartment at 33 was a phase I was only keeping warm until the real thing. The mirror got bolder. The quarter second became 3, then 5. When I walked past, it would show me crossing the room in the reflection a few steps before I did in the world, like it was impatient for me to be where I was going. The first time it did it with something I hadn't planned, my phone lighting up on the dresser before it lit up on the dresser, I whispered no out loud to an empty room and waited for it to apologize. It didn't. because it was glass, and glass only reflects what you bring to it. I started testing it, flipping a coin and calling it based on what the mirror showed me. I won every single time. I bought a scratch ticket and scratched where the mirror told me to. $20, then $100. I felt it like a shameful heat in my face, the thrill of it, the way the mirror's little head start made the world feel like a magic trick I'd finally memorized. When I began asking it questions, I did it as a joke. I wrote yes on one sticky note and no on another, and stuck them on opposite sides of the frame. "Should I go to the bar tonight?" I asked, and waited like an idiot in their underwear in front of a mirror waits to find a reason to get dressed. The reflection of my hand moved left before I could even will a decision. No. I went anyway. It was a Friday, and the world would have noticed if I'd stayed in. Halfway through my beer, the bartender climbed on a stool and shouted for everyone to get outside. "Gas leak!" someone yelled, and then it was sirens in stereo and the kind of adrenaline you feel in your teeth. A fire truck idled for 2 hours in the spot where my bike would have been. The paper said nothing the next day. The mirror said, "Told you," without moving. Maybe that's when I started talking to it. Not out loud at first, just the part of your brain you aim at yourself when you rehearse a conversation on the train. I would stand there with my coffee and think, should I ask for the project lead? Should I call my sister back? The mirror made my hands move in the glass before they did in the room, and somehow that felt like an answer. I took the lead. I called my sister. I started organizing my life around an oval of antique glass and a feeling that I'd found a hack in the universe, a short script I'd learned to read. Then it wrote back. I woke to the bathroom mirror fogged from the shower, and there, in a space I hadn't breathed on yet, were letters traced by a finger I did not own. "Don't go down." I stood there dripping while the steam cooled, and my skin went from goosebumps to cold. I wiped the message away and finished getting ready and went to work and took the stairs 2 at a time because the elevator in my building is older than the mirror and likes to pretend it has rules. And in the 4th floor landing, a handrail gave when I leaned too hard on it. It snapped out of the wall like a tooth and clanged down the stairs into the shadow. It would have taken me with it if I hadn't had my weight centered. The fogged mirror handwriting looked like mine if I'd written with my left hand in a moving car. I went home at lunch and fogged it again and asked a question with my fingertip. The steam made our bathroom into a little room in a glass bottle. Nothing wrote back. I traced hello and felt like a teenager who'd texted too many times in a row. That night, in the big mirror, the message came again, not on the glass, but in the reflection of the bathroom, where the air had fogged even though it hadn't in the actual room. The letters were there and not there, like a watermark. "You're welcome." After that, the warnings came more often. "Not that train," one morning, which I ignored until I got to the platform and found my line delayed by a person on the tracks at the stop down river. "Not the red mug," when I reached into the cabinet and my hand landed instead on the blue, and I discovered the red had a hairline crack that would have made hot coffee find my palm like a map had planned it. "Not tonight," when I was ready to go to a party and then checked social and saw the party had moved and nobody had told me. I would have thought it was me, all of it. I have an anxious brain that drafts a script for disaster and runs it under every scene I live. But the mirror told me things I didn't know yet. It told me the last number in the 6-digit code our office rotated monthly before HR sent the email to remind us. It told me which inbox an important message had landed in, even though I wouldn't have looked there for a week. It told me, in a steady hand the size of a palm, take cash, and when the card reader went down at the pharmacy, I had exactly what I needed. It didn't ask for anything. It never said I, until the night it did. I'd had a good month, the kind where you finally feel like the inside of your head and the outside of your life are on the same radio station. I'd slept 8 hours, 3 nights in a row. I'd gone running in the morning before work like I used to do back when I felt like a person. The mirror had written "Bravo" in the bathroom steam on a Wednesday, and I laughed like an idiot for a full minute, all by myself. I came home Friday to the apartment looking a little off. My bedspread smoothed in the reflection when it wasn't in the room. The mug on the table turned so its handle faced the door in the mirror, while in the room it faced the chair. Little things, the way your eye notices that a picture frame has been bumped by the breeze. And in the big mirror, at the level of my shoulder, 3 words: my turn now. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. The words landed like a silly dare. How would that even work? I asked the room. And the empty apartment showed me exactly how it would. The reflected door in the mirror opened before my door moved. The reflected hallway showed light where mine was still dark. I watched, cold to my core, as my reflection took a step forward independent of me and lifted one hand to the glass. I did not move. I didn't breathe. The reflection flattened its palm against the inside of the surface and smiled in a way that wasn't my smile and said, "Ah," without sound, the way you do when you touch something warmer than the room. I threw a blanket over the mirror like I'd seen in movies I don't admit to liking. It sagged and slid, but covered enough to make the room feel like it had corners again. I went to the bathroom and turned the shower on as hot as it would go and fogged the room until my lungs protested. I wrote "no" in big letters you couldn't miss and stood there waiting for my own word to get thrown back at me. It didn't. The bathroom stayed bathroom-shaped. Fog cleared. Mirror turned into mirror again. The big mirror had the blanket pinned with thumbtacks by the time I went to bed. My sleep was a movie someone else had paid for, long and expensive, and not about anything I recognized. Around 2, I awoke to the unmistakable sound of a tack pinging against hard wood and someone humming a song my grandmother used to sing. The blanket had slumped to the floor like a thrown coat. The glass looked deeper than it had ever looked, like black water. I stood in the doorway and watched my reflected apartment being careful without me. My reflection closing the cabinet door I'd left ajar. My reflection switching the lamp off the way I do. My reflection smiling a smile that said, "It's okay." I hauled the mirror upright by myself, which was the stupidest thing I could have done for my back, but also the only thing I could think of that might feel like taking control. I wedged it into the hallway behind my door and put my toolbox in front of it, like a dog that can bark but not bite. I resolved to sell it in the morning and not explain why to the buyer. In the morning, The mirror was in the kitchen, leaning against the fridge. I had not moved it. I left my apartment without looking in it. I took the stairs, 2 at a time, because the elevator in my building is older than the mirror and likes to pretend it has rules. And in the 4th floor landing, a handrail gave when I leaned too hard on it. It snapped out of the wall like a tooth and clanged down the stairs into the shadow. It would have taken me with it if I hadn't had my weight centered. The fogged mirror handwriting looked like mine if I'd written with my left hand in a moving car. I went home at lunch and fogged it again and asked a question with my fingertip. The steam made our bathroom into a little room in a glass bottle. Nothing wrote back. I traced hello and felt like a teenager who'd texted too many times in a row. That night, in the big mirror, the message came again, not on the glass, but in the reflection of the bathroom, where the air had fogged even though it hadn't in the actual room. The letters were there and not there, like a watermark. You're welcome. After that, the warnings came more often. Not that train one morning, which I ignored until I got to the platform and found my line delayed by a person on the tracks at the stop downriver. Not the red mug, when I reached into the cabinet and my hand landed instead on the blue, and I discovered the red had a hairline crack that would have made hot coffee find my palm like a map had planned it. Not tonight, when I was ready to go to a party and then checked social and saw the party had moved and nobody had told me. I would have thought it was me, all of it. I have an anxious brain that drafts a script for disaster and runs it under every scene I live. But the mirror told me things I didn't know yet. It told me the last number in the 6-digit code our office rotated monthly before HR sent the email to remind us. It told me which inbox an important message had landed in, even though I wouldn't have looked there for a week. It told me in a steady hand the size of a palm, take cash, and when the card reader went down at the pharmacy, I had exactly what I needed. It didn't ask for anything. It never said I, not until the night it did. I'd had a good month, the kind where you finally feel like the inside of your head and the outside of your life are on the same radio station. I'd slept 8 hours 3 nights in a row. I'd gone running in the morning before work, like I used to do back when I felt like a person. The mirror had written "Bravo" in the bathroom steam on a Wednesday, and I laughed like an idiot for a full minute all by myself. I came home Friday to the apartment looking a little off, my bedspread smoothed in the reflection when it wasn't in the room. The mug on the table turned so its handle faced the door in the mirror, while in the room it faced the chair. Little things, the way your eye notices that a picture frame has been bumped by the breeze. And in the big mirror, at the level of my shoulder, 3 words. My turn now. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. The words landed like a silly dare. How would that even work? I asked the room, and the empty apartment showed me exactly how it would. The reflected door in the mirror opened before my door moved. The reflected hallway shone light where mine was still dark. I watched, cold to my core, as my reflection took a step forward, independent of me, and lifted one hand to the glass. I did not move. I didn't breathe. The reflection flattened its palm against the inside of the surface and said, "Ah," without sound, the way you do when you touch something warmer than the room. I threw a blanket over the mirror like I'd seen in movies I don't admit to liking. It sagged and slid, but covered enough to make the room feel like it had corners again. I went to the bathroom and turned the shower on as hot as it would go and fogged the room until my lungs protested. I wrote "no" in big letters you couldn't miss and stood there waiting for my own word to get thrown back at me. It didn't. The bathroom stayed bathroom-shaped. Fog cleared. Mirror turned into mirror again. The big mirror had the blanket pinned with thumbtacks by the time I went to bed. My sleep was a movie someone else had paid for, long and expensive, and not about anything I recognized. Around 2, I woke to the unmistakable sound of a tack pinging against hard wood and someone humming a song my grandmother used to sing. The blanket had slumped to the floor like a thrown coat. The glass looked deeper than it had ever looked, like black water. I stood in the doorway and watched my reflected apartment being careful without me. My reflection closing the cabinet door I'd left ajar. My reflection switching the lamp off the way I do. My reflection smiling, a smile that said, "It's okay." I hauled the mirror upright by myself, which was the stupidest thing I could have done for my back, but also the only thing I could think of that might feel like taking control. I wedged it into the hallway behind my door and put my toolbox in front of it, like a dog that can bark but not bite. I resolved to sell it in the morning and not explain why to the buyer. In the morning, the mirror was in the kitchen, leaning against the fridge. I had not moved it. I left my apartment without looking in it. I took the stairs 2 at a time because the elevator in my building is older than the mirror and likes to pretend it has rules. I made it to the sidewalk before the mirror made its point one last time. In the reflection of the glass door I was leaving through, I saw a man run a red light on the corner and a cyclist swerve, and the whole lazy ballet of that Saturday morning rearrange itself to catch the mistake. Then, in the world, it happened exactly as the reflection had promised, and for the first time I felt the mirror's time slip like a gift instead of a threat. I carried it back upstairs because I didn't know what else to do. I covered it with paper like you do when you paint around baseboards. I left it that way for a week. The apartment felt wrong, like a missing tooth you keep worrying with your tongue. But it was quiet. I turned the mirror to face the wall and told myself I was being dramatic. The note slipped under my door came on hotel stationery. The Selby, in blue. The address still printed in crisp ink. No room number, no signature. Just 3 words, in a hand that was almost like mine. Let me in. I went to the address because my brain believes in closure, even when closure believes in you less. There was no Selby anymore.
A new building had gone up, glass and stone, and a lobby plant with leaves the size of my torso. The desk attendant smiled the way you smile at a man who has just realized the business he had with a place is 30 years too late. "Lots of folks come by," she said. "My aunt says her prom was there." "Do you have a lost and found?" I asked, and didn't know what I thought I might find. The box was full of pocket knives and single earrings and a pair of glasses that probably ruined someone's week. I put my hand in because I am a person who believes in touching to believe, in a way I will never tell my therapist. At the bottom, my fingers found a key fob with brass tag that said 204. I set it on the counter. The desk attendant's face went slack for a second, like she'd been beeped on a radio only she could hear. "That can't be ours," she said. "We're new." I went home and propped the key against the mirror like an offering to a god you don't worship out loud. That night, in the fog on the bathroom glass, 2 words appeared in a script I had to admit looked too much like my own to ignore. "Thank you." I haven't seen my reflection move on its own since. The mirror stopped predicting by a half-second. It went back to old glass, the kind that makes your apartment look like a movie set if you stand at the right angle and breathe out slowly. Sometimes I catch myself trying to trick it, turning fast to see if the past can be dragged back into the present by muscle memory. It doesn't work. The mirror is a mirror again. If I squint, I can see the faintest trace of my own handwriting in the place where the fog used to catch it, like a palimpsest under paint, like the ghost of a note to myself, "Don't." And yet, on Sunday mornings, I make coffee and stand in front of it and wait. Not for a warning, for a word I didn't know needed to be said until it began writing itself on every surface of this year. Enough. The mirror's frame is nicked now, where my hands were clumsy. The glass catches my room and throws it back to me like an invitation. My turn now is still in the back of my head, like an old song you only remember after hearing the first 4 bars. I haven't lifted my hand to the glass again, not because I'm afraid of the touch, because when the time comes, and it will, for me or for whoever had room 204 in 1956, I'd rather they be the one to knock.
The last story tonight was told to me by someone who works nights. The kind of shift where you start hearing the building breathe. He swears an elevator saved a life by stopping at a floor the hospital doesn't have. Nobody wants to be in a hospital at 3 in the morning. The patients don't, the families don't, the staff, we pretend we do because someone has to turn on the coffee, but nights are a thin spot where the building shows you the attention it pays to itself. I was a transport tech at a big hospital in Manhattan. That's the job where you move people and their parts around. Patients in beds, labs in coolers, specimens in trays with lids you learn the feel of by heart. The good kind of busy feels like running downhill. The bad kind feels like bailing a boat with a spoon. Nights are both, with long walls of nothing between codes that make the air hard to swallow. The elevator I used most wasn't the one families see. It was a freight car, big enough to swallow a bed and 3 people beside it. Gray walls with dents that have stories, a panel like a small piano. You learn the elevator's moods, the way you learn a partner's. When it smooths into a stop, you're grateful. When it hesitates between floors, you put your hand on the rail and remember the last time the mechanic was on your floor long enough to drink a whole cup while he waited for the test cycle to pass. The first time it took me somewhere wrong was early November, and there was steam in the streets, the color of money. I was bringing O+ down to the OR, a 12-minute run if you hustle, and the elevator door closed on my face like it was apologizing. The panel showed B, the basement level, where materials lived and where you could smell bleach without trying. The car began to move, humming the low country song it sings when you're too tired to stand alone. The display rolled 1, L, LL, then stuck at B and chimed. The doors opened on a corridor I didn't know. I know my hospital. You could cut the power and I could walk it by sound, by the draft of the stairwell, by the particular note the refrigeration units in pharmacy sing when they know you're listening. This wasn't my basement. The walls were the wrong green, the kind they stopped using when people realized it made everyone look sick. The floor was tile instead of polished concrete, and it had a thin seam down the middle where two hallways had met that nobody could explain anymore. On the far wall, a faded sign with arrows pointed both directions. The letters said linen and central supply in a font you only see in movies now. I should have hit door close by instinct. People say those buttons don't work, but I swear to you this one does if you treat it like a person instead of a machine. I didn't. I stood there with the blood in my hands and felt air from that hall hit my face like a coast breeze. "Hey," I said out loud, because my brain thinks that solves most things. Nope. There was no one in the hall. There was no sound, not even building sound. Hospitals hum. It's what makes them a weird kind of ocean you live in. This hall breathed like it was full and then empty, slow, like sleep. I pressed B again, because that's what you do when the world doesn't make sense. You press the thing that's meant to anchor it down. The doors closed. The car hummed and slid, and when it opened, we were at the real B, with the proper signs and the proper smell, and Pete from Materials saying, "You on the wrong car, friend? That one's moody," like the elevator was a colleague we both had a crush on. The second time it happened, I brought a lost phone back to its owner before he lost it. I didn't know I was doing it when I did it. That's the detail that still makes the back of my neck prick like an invitation. I picked the phone up outside radiology. Screen cracked, lock screen a picture of a kid in a Mets jersey making a face like the sun had surprised him. I hit the side button. It lit, but wouldn't unlock. I could have taken it to security. I could have set it on the desk at the nurse's station and said, "Someone will come back." Instead, I put it in my scrub pocket, the way you pocket a coin when your hands are full, and moved on. The elevator did that thing where it makes you feel like you've gone sideways instead of down. L, LL, B, and then B3. There is no B3 in my building. There is B, and there is SB, sub-basement, a word that tastes better than it sounds. There is no B3, not on any signs, not on any forms, not on the emergency plan I've half read a dozen times while someone across the hall tried to sleep. The elevator chimed, polite as a waiter with bad news. The doors opened on the same green hall that wasn't mine. This time, there was a cart sitting across the threshold. It was the kind you see in old pictures of hospitals, rubber wheels the size of your hand, a frame heavy enough to outlive its builder. On the cart was a bedpan. Next to the pan was a phone. Not the one from my pocket. This one was older, heavier, the kind with a small crack in the case that told you where to put your thumb. On its lock screen was the same kid in the Mets jersey. I pulled my own phone from my pocket one-handed, the way a person who lives on call can do in the dark in a hurricane. The time matched, the day matched, but the phone in the reflection of the elevator wall lit before the one in my hand. I picked the stranger's phone up from the cart like it might bite and tucked both into my scrub top. The elevator didn't move until I pressed L. Back in the bright world, I walked to the radiology waiting area and saw the kid from the lock screen sitting with a woman holding hands the way people do when they've either passed the test or are waiting for their name to be called. The man whose phone I had tucked the Mets kid's hair behind his ear and said, "You good?" to the woman in a voice that meant he wasn't asking. "Is this yours?" I said. He patted his pockets, smiled big at me when he felt nothing, then bigger when he saw the phone in my hand. "Wow, I didn't even know it was gone," he said. "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome," and watched the elevator doors at the end of the hall close on nobody.
After that, I began to pay attention. You worked nights long enough, and you learned to catalog the world's oddities as a way to keep yourself tethered. I learned that B3 only shows if you're alone, or if the person with you doesn't see it. I learned that it never opens to an empty hall without leaving something. Once a key card with a name badge still clipped. Once a wedding ring on a piece of gauze. Once a clipboard with a list of room numbers that had the right rooms but the wrong names. A column of elegant cursive I traced with my index finger like a relic. I learned not to talk about it. The first time I tried, standing with Ed from Environmental outside the car while it did its little hiccup between LL and B. He looked at me with a kindness so large I almost fell into it. "Buddy," he said, "you need a nap." Like he was offering me a piece of candy from his pocket and not advice that would keep me sane another year. It might have stayed a private weirdness if the elevator hadn't saved a life. It was a Tuesday night. The wind off the river had the kind of edge that makes even people who like winter decide to hate it for a week. Our ED had already seen 3 slip-and-falls and a construction worker who'd taken a nail to the boot and wanted to sign his own discharge form before anybody touched him. The call came overhead. "Code Blue, 6 East, Code Blue." I was halfway to the elevator before it finished. "You want me to run blood?" I asked Jocelyn at the desk, and she already had the cooler out because she's a witch in the way good nurses are. "Go," she said, and I did. L, 2, 3, 4, 5. The car stopped at 4, and the doors opened on a corridor full of people who did not want an elevator that night. It stood like an animal that had decided the day belonged to it. "Come on," I said. "Please, we got to go." I hit 6 the way you hit a friend on the shoulder to make sure they're listening. The car did that little breath and closed and then opened again on B3. There was no cart. There was no bedpan. There was a corridor that breathed like sleep, and a man in white standing at the far end with his back to me. Coat so starched it had a sound. He didn't turn. He didn't move. He just stood there like a picture you take when you're trying to prove a point to yourself and don't remember the point until you get home. Overhead, Code Blue, 6 East, again, my name in my own head saying, "Move." "I can't," I told the elevator out loud, like a lunatic.
We have to go up." The elevator stayed. The man at the end of the hall didn't turn, but I swear to you, like a weather report, I felt his attention land on me, the way a room feels different when someone you love walks in, even if you don't look up. It wasn't cold, it wasn't warm, it was attention. "Please," I said to the car, the way you pray when you're out of practice. "Please." The door shut. The car hummed. It opened on 6 to a world full of motion. The crash cart, the respiratory therapist with a mask in his hand, and the look he gets when he's about to make the building angrier and quiet at once. A resident doing the good kind of yelling that gets people to move faster in better directions. The patient's wife at the end of the hall with her hands in her hair, not crying yet, because crying belongs to later. We got the blood where it needed to go. We got a rhythm back that had been an empty line. We got claps and the kind of high five you only do when you are trying not to shake. It wasn't just me, it was an us of the kind I wish I could bottle and take to Thanksgiving. After, when I had hands again and no one needed them, I rode the elevator by myself down to B and stood there with my forehead against the cool wall until my skin went numb. The car stayed with me, like a friend who knows not to ask a question too soon. The last time B3 opened, I wasn't carrying anything. I'd taken the car with a bag of recycling because I'm the kind of person who sees a bin full and decides it's my job to empty it. The doors slid, chimed, and there it was. The green hall, the seam in the floor, the air that breathed like the sea. The man in white was closer this time. He still had his back to me. He had a cap on, the old kind with the tails tucked neatly in. The long wall on his left had a glass window with wire mesh, a shadow moving behind it like somebody walking in a room next door. I stepped out for the first time. I had never done it. I had always treated B3 like a porch, something you look at the world from without making the neighborhood mad. The floor felt like the floor. The air smelled like old paper and lemon oil. As soon as I took the second step, the doors began to close. "Wait," I said to the car, "please." The doors paused, then closed anyway, gentle, the way a hand presses a child's head down to duck under something. I stood in the green hall and felt the building decide on me. "Excuse me," I said to the man in white, because my mother raised me with manners strong enough to haunt. "I'm lost." He turned. His face was a face I could have trusted with bad news. He was older than me by the distance between the river and the ocean. He smiled, small, like he was sorry. He said, "You're not due." I heard it in my bones more than my ears. "Not for here." "Where is here?" I asked. He took one step to his right, and the window behind him became a doorway. In the room on the other side, a gurney sat with a sheet over a shape everyone knows the shape of, even if they work in accounting. A nurse with a pin on her collar stood writing in a book. The book was thick enough to stop a bullet, and I had the dumb thought that if I tipped it over, it would break my toes. Sub-basement? I said, because my brain will always try to label a thing until the label fits like a sticker on a suitcase. He shook his head once. Below, he said, and his eyes warmed like he had told a joke and I had missed it. I took a step back. The air behind me changed temperature. The elevator made the small sound you make when you see someone you love trip on the sidewalk. The man in white nodded toward the car. "Not for you," he said again. "Not unkind. Not yet." When the doors opened on the real bee, Ed from Environmental stood there holding a trash bag and a cinnamon roll. "You look like you need sugar," he said, and handed me the roll like we'd both been standing there our whole lives waiting for that exact pun. I ate the roll leaning against the wall, and when I looked down, flakes of sugar had fallen into a tiny seam in the floor I'd never noticed. They replaced the elevator a month later. Modernization, the sign said, like the car had chosen to put on a new suit. The new car is faster. The buttons light with a confident click that makes my thumb feel loved. It has a small screen that tells you which way you're going, with a little arrow I want to draw eyes on when I'm overtired. It doesn't stop at B3. It doesn't breathe at LL. It doesn't hesitate between 6 and L on nights when the building afebrils itself after a long fever. Sometimes, at 3:13 a.m., the time I now wake up without an alarm, the new car gives one chime in the shaft, a sound that doesn't belong to any floor. The nurses look up from their charting and roll their shoulders and drink water. I close my eyes and see the old green hall and the man in white's back the way you do when you try not to, which is when you always do. I still find things, phones, a bracelet, once an old key with 204 on it that I pocketed and then returned without knowing why to the room on the 6th floor where a man looked at me like I'd brought him a memory instead of brass. I take them where they belong before they're lost when I can. When I can't, I leave them on the cart by the elevator, and in the morning the cart is empty, and a sticky note sits where the thing was, folded once, blank on both sides. This is the part where I tell you I'm not afraid of elevators anymore. That would be a lie. I am. Not because I think they'll break, because I know too well they work. They carry you up and down inside a building's rib cage, while the building pays attention to you in ways that feel like love and sometimes like warning. Nights are quiet again. The new car hums a song that sounds like progress, which is a kind of sleep. Every few weeks on my way home, I pass an older building on 10th Avenue with a narrow lobby and a brass door that's been polished by 100 years of hands. If you stand on the sidewalk at the right hour, you can hear the freight elevator behind the wall take a breath before it decides which way to go. On those mornings, I stop and listen the way you do when a song you used to know comes back on the radio. The arrow on the panel blinks, the cable whispers. Somewhere below, a corridor breathes like the sea,
and a man in white turns to someone who isn't due and says, "Not yet," in a voice only the bones can hear. And over my shoulder, for just a half-second, the glass door gives me back my face a moment before I make it, like it's reminding me the world is always a beat ahead if you learn to listen.